Hello, hello, and welcome or welcome back to the Live Label Free podcast. I'm your host, Livia Sarah, and today I am once again joined by my wonderful friend and co-host, Mike.
Hello, friends. That came out creepier than
That
I was
sounds
expecting.
so creepy. Okay, well, as promised, we are back for the sequel of our Q&A series in which we answer questions sent in by you. We've got some awesome questions lined up today that I cannot wait to get into. But before we dive in, I want to remind you that enrollment for the Autistically ED-Free Academy is open for just a few more days. This is an 8-week group coaching program in which you'll learn how to support yourself or someone you care for through eating disorder recovery in a neurodiversity affirming way. Each week, we'll dive into key topics including sensory sensitivities, demand avoidance, rebuilding trust after trauma, distinguishing autistic traits from ED behaviors, and much more. Along with live group coaching calls with both Mike and I, each week we'll have dedicated Q&A sessions where you can ask any and all questions you have about neurodiversity and eating disorders. And the best part is you'll get them all answered in real time. And not only that, but you'll also get 24/7 access to a private community to ask even more questions and get even more real-time support from both me and Mike and other people who genuinely get what you're going through. The road to recovery doesn't have to be traumatic. It can be empowering, affirming, and aligned with the neurodivergent mind. Just obsessed with the rhyme there. Just a few more days, you can secure your spot in the academy, and after that, well, you'll have to wait until I reopen the academy, if I ever even do. So be sure to get all the details at livelabelfree.com/group. Mike and I hope to see you inside the community, and now let's dive into today's episode. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm tired, but I'm well.
Yeah. And I'm like pretending like we haven't been talking for like an hour already.
I was gonna
Um,
go with it, you know.
yeah. Did you? Yeah, I sent you that reels on Instagram of like me listening to my friend's private podcast. It was like for anyone listening, it's like one of those like funny animation videos of like this. What would you even call that character? Like a stuffed animal cartoon? It looks like.
I cat person? I have no idea what that was.
Yeah, and it was, well, the video was basically like me when I receive a voice memo from one of my friends and listening to it like it's a podcast, like sitting on the couch, putting our headphones on. Yeah, because when we send each other voice memos, I do it with you and I do it with like two other people. Like our voice memos are like so long, and we've often joked about how like what if we just like posted this as a podcast? It would be like really good content. But yeah,
We tend to babble at one another whenever we leave voicemails. I tend to like go off into like weird like rabbit holes and stuff. Yeah, I don't know if that is like purely neurodivergent on like my behalf or just from the sheer amount of podcasting I have done over like a decade plus that oh my God, it has been over a decade. Oh God, it's been like 15 years. Oh,
well,
just I feel like someone just stepped over my grave. Um, that I'm incapable of being in front of a microphone and talking into it where I don't feel like I need to fill time. I
yes.
I just go off immediately and I like am have to create content. So I those are my voice memos to you.
Yeah, no, I totally resonate with that. And also, like, when you're talking and then you just like blank out and don't know the exact next thing you're gonna say, you're like, no, there's a blockade coming. I need to go in all these different directions to like fill the space.
Yes, I
Um,
can't just pause and think for a moment. I have to
no. Yeah, well, I think that's
let
also
me talk to you about ancient Greek history for a second before I get back into whatever I'm
which is funny because today I was telling you about how I was researching the Victorian era. So random if you don't have context. But yeah, I feel like this actually bridges very well into our first question, which is, as neurodivergent entrepreneurs slash freelancers, how do you create daily routines for yourself without focusing too much on work, food, and exercise. And I feel like it's relevant because I think for our brains that do go into a thousand different directions at every minute of every day when not contained, routines are very important for us to stay, I like to say, within the sides of the river. Oh my God, this is so random. But what I mean by that is like for me, if the constraints are clear, like if I say, okay, at this time it's this and at this time it's this, and it's like the two sides of the river, like then I can stay in the flow. And I think for me, when I get into a writing flow specifically, it's because I've so clearly outlined like what's going to happen when it's going to happen. If I don't have that, if I don't know exactly what I'm going to do that day, I just cannot function. So I think, yeah, Mike, do you want to kind of build on how you create daily routines for yourself?
I think I've gotten into an interesting groove in the latter part of my life. It was a weird way to put that. My birthday's coming up, so I'm like in total like I'm probably gonna die soon mode. I get that way around my birthday. Before we go down that rabbit hole, I'll get back to Iris's question. Kind of like where I'm at is I do really like routines and I need routines and I need them to like kind of be settled. Like you said, kind of stay in the river. As a friend of mine says in regards to many different things, she always says everything is working within parameters. And that's kind of like where my mind goes. I've adopted, and this is for me personally, I've adopted more of the structure, a structureless structure where I have a lot of options I can pull in to create structure. Like obviously there are things every day where
Yes.
I need to get this done, I have work to fall back on, obviously, and that helps. That actually kind of grounds me.
Yep.
Something to do. But I try not to allow myself to make that rigid, and which is very easy to do. Very easy to fall into, you get up, you make coffee, you start work, you eat breakfast, go back to work, you eat lunch, just like
The
that and that
motions, yeah.
becomes like the entire routine where everything is like within parameters. Everything's on every event is on a specific ladder and you go up the ladder every single day and then you come back down
Yeah.
and you go up the ladder again. It's not that helpful, honestly. Not in like the long term. Like for short term, and especially when you're in kind of like an overload mode and you need to like fall back into something where your
Hmm.
brain doesn't have to think,
Hmm.
honestly, that's when like the overstructure helps.
Yeah.
Being more structureless is when you have like the pillars of your day and of your
Hmm.
week.
Yes.
So for me, it's like, doing work, I have like these certain things that are going to happen every day. I don't necessarily even have control of moving them around to other things, stuff that has to get done.
Yeah.
And then outside of that, I have more options. Like there are things I can fall back where I can do a very structured thing that is pre-planned, or I can do like another option on top of that. Like I
Hmm.
don't necessarily need to get like this other thing done today.
Yes.
I could if I wanted to, so that's an option to throw in there. But also, I could go do this other thing, or I could slip in hanging out with a friend instead. Like
Hmm.
other things can go into these slots. It's a bit like card slots on a PC or something, adding extra RAM. I can take out one thing and I can slide in another if I need to. But I
Hmm.
also have this more robust structure kind of around it. So it's like a skeleton, and then every day I can dress up the skeleton however I necessarily want.
Dress up the
And
skeleton.
and that also really keeps me from the exercise part of it because I definitely when I was in the throes of disorder
Hmm.
that was a big thing for me. It was like I needed to exercise at a certain amount every single day, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Thing everybody experiences.
Yeah. I'd like also like if there was any empty time, I was like, we need to exercise. Like, and I started
Yeah,
just
it's I'm
like,
wasting it right now.
yeah, and I
Yeah,
just started feeling that empty time because it was like, oh, well, that would mean I have to exercise, which I didn't want to do,
want
but
to
it was like a
do. Yeah.
compulsion.
Exactly. Yeah. And so then you start structuring everything else around the exercise so that way there's no empty time. And
Yeah.
then it just builds up even more. Like I can't structure exercise. as much as, you know, I like lifting weights and I like boxing and stuff like that,
Mhm.
but and a lot of times I'll just go like, yeah, I don't feel like exercising for like the next month, so I'm just not going to because I have those other things to slot in. Like exercise for me, like that can't be a pillar of my weekly structure. Like
Mhm.
that has to be something that was always optional that I can slip in if I want to, if I have time, if I feel like it,
Right.
and it doesn't stand for anything necessarily. And
Right.
food is a little bit more interesting because
Has to be a
there
pillar.
yeah,
Yeah.
you know, it sort of needs to be because we are biological human beings who
Yeah.
survive on sustenance.
Right.
It's a complicated subject because obviously we can overstructure food and feeding times, and there are also periods where a heavily structured feeding time might be helpful
Yeah.
if you're in recovery. You know, I went through that where it was like every 3 hours I should probably eat something, whether I want to or not. That was a period where that had to be structured.
Hmm.
Mechanical eating is very helpful in that way. Other than that, you got to make sure you eat because interoceptive awareness can go out the fucking window sometimes. And so you need to like put down a little bit of a soft rule like, hey, if it's breakfast time, you should eat. If it's lunchtime, you should probably eat, just to make sure you get something in and you're not, not focusing too much on it. Maybe not be so much worried. It's more about the events of you're having a meal without the structure of what the meal is necessarily, unless it's just something where you happen to eat, you happen to like a certain thing at a certain part of the day. For me, I like a sandwich in the middle of the day most of the time. Not all the time, most of the time. And I'm probably going to eat a sandwich every goddamn day. But that's not really like a structured meal thing. That's just like I like the sameness of that.
Yeah. That's what I have
So it's a
in the morning, my morning oatmeal and coffee. Like I go to bed looking forward to my coffee.
oh, you do that too?
Oh, I
Every
think,
night I'm like, I want to go to sleep so I can wake up and have
yep.
coffee.
And like the moment I wake up, like I don't know if you've ever had this, but I had this a few nights ago where I woke up like super early because I had to like go pee and it was dark outside, so I knew it like wasn't time to get up yet. Because I'm not one of those like 4 a.m. wake up people because I'm like I tend to work like write till pretty late. So I knew I couldn't get up yet. But like as I was walking past the kitchen, I was like, I wish it was morning so I can have my coffee. Yeah, but I didn't, and I fell back asleep, which was good.
Oh, good. See, I probably would have just caved and had coffee.
Oh, well, I've done
That
that
wouldn't be a
before.
problem.
Last year, I tried new medication for anxiety. That medication did not work for, I think I told you about this story.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, and I literally, I couldn't go to, like, I could not sleep. So I went, tried to go to bed at like 11. Didn't happen, didn't happen. And I, like, have never been someone who, like necessarily felt like suicidal, but it was like that night with that medication, like I did not know how I was gonna make it through the night. Like I genuinely did not know. So I remember getting up at like 1 a.m. Like I literally just made like 5 cups of coffee. And I was like, this is gonna get me through the night. And I sat down with all my coffee and I was just writing and I just started writing my book about like getting over autistic burnout and finding peace in the chaos. And it was, yeah, but like when it was morning that day, like I felt so weird because I hadn't slept at all. But I don't think I've ever been that grateful to have made it through a night. I'm sure you have your own moments like that in your history.
Oh, yeah, many. And,
Um,
and what's funny about that is like I'm pretty sure I have been on or am on like the same exact medication and don't have like an experience like that.
yeah,
And it's always wild that
I
like that
think
can happen.
I think that's true. And I think the doctor who prescribed it to me was just like, honestly, did not have a brain cell because she put me on like, she started me like that first night on like 30 milligrams, which I feel like you should not do for like the first time.
No, no, no.
Um,
You wean yourself onto this stuff. You don't
yeah. So,
do that. I wean myself on very slowly to it. That was my
yeah.
instruction.
Yeah, so I didn't trust her anymore after that.
Yeah, no wonder you had that reaction. That's not good.
Mm,
Some people fuck up medication. Yeah, anyway, I babbled a bit there. I don't know if anything I said made sense, but
No, it did.
what do you think?
It did a lot. Like, honestly, I was like, I hope he just like keeps talking because all of the wisdom is so good and it's more content that I don't have to think of. Uh, no, but honestly, like the thing that stood out to me that reminds me a lot of a term I feel like I've used on the podcast before, and you can attest to this because you edit the podcast, is that term freedom routines. And I talk about this a lot in the academy as well. I think one of the questions that I get asked like so much from my clients, aside from what does recovery for a neurodivergent person even look like, is this idea of like, how do I even know how to structure my life? Like, how do I know what to eat? How do I know when to eat? I think these huge question marks also come, unfortunately, from this perpetuating idea on social media and in like these anti-diet recovery spaces of like intuitive eating being the way. Like that is what recovery looks like. And I think there's nothing inherently wrong with intuitive eating, but I think for neurodivergent people, I see it more as like intuitively structured eating. I feel like that's kind of how need to see it because for
Yeah.
me, I do consider myself in a very broad sense of the word, like without all the associations that we've made to it, like I do consider myself an intuitive eater. I do not eat anymore based off of like what I believe I should eat or what I believe is good or that kind of stuff. And at the same time, if I don't have like a rough structure of what I'm gonna eat and when I'm gonna eat, like my whole body fills with anxiety. And I'm sure that in a lot of ways that's tied to my past of restriction because it's like, well, if you don't know what you're gonna eat, there's the possibility that you won't eat, and that's dangerous because we've done that and that didn't work.
Yeah, exactly.
So for me, it's very important that I do kind of know what I'm gonna eat roughly. Like again, I'm not strict about it. Like if I go to the store and they're sold out of the yogurt that I always buy, I'm not gonna have a meltdown and freak out that they don't have the yogurt. But again, I also don't have OFID, so that's like maybe another situation. But I'm talking
It's
more
different
from
for everybody. Yeah, of
yeah, like
course.
I'm talking more from my perspective of like anorexia. Like if they didn't have that low calorie yogurt that I knew mixed perfectly into the smoothie with this exact texture because the smoothie had to be perfect, otherwise it wouldn't be worth the calories, and then I couldn't eat. It all had to be just, it was all Goldilocks. It was chemistry. Like everything was
Yeah.
weighed to the gram. And obviously I don't eat like that anymore. But again, I think also this idea of like, oh, you have to be able to be spontaneous and say yes to someone inviting you to dinner 5 minutes in advance. Like, I always tell my clients, like, I will never, ever be that person. Even if I really like you, I will never say yes to your dinner invitation 5 minutes in advance. You can tell me 5 minutes in advance that we have a dinner appointment next week, but not today. And that has nothing to do with, oh, I'm afraid of like going over the plan or I'm afraid of calories, but that has everything to do with my need for predictability. And I think it's just one of those examples how, you can use that trait to your advantage in recovery to create a predictable structure around food, but one that's also like stretchy in the sense that like if
Yes.
you and I talk about this in the academy because I talk about like this idea of how we need to create safety boxes, but the boxes are like stretchy boxes. They're not like hardcore balls. I have like visuals in there so it makes sense when I'm explaining it.
It's a rubber band.
Yes.
Structure is a rubber band. You can stretch it. You can't like overstretch it because otherwise it snaps. But you can stretch it for quite a while, and
Mhm.
it's not one shape. You can mold it and change it, but you know that it has some sort of limits that it can go, and that makes it a structure.
Yes.
And we as people in general look at routine is based on needs to survive and work. And that's what a routine is. So when it comes to, food to survive, work because you need to work and like responsibilities, and that's what a routine is.
Mhm.
I think it's fun to experiment a little bit and like build a daily routine that is completely divorced of all of those things. Like what if you built a routine based around self-care and fun? That's the entire structure of the day
Mhm.
is around that. And like a routine can be that. And once you like start to work out like what would you like that routine to be? And then you can integrate those things. And then it's not focusing so much on what you think should make up the routine. It's what you want to make up the routine.
Yeah. No, I think that's super powerful. I think that word want is so, so important. I think that's where a lot of us get really caught is, asking ourselves, what do we need to do? Because the thing is, we don't need to do anything. So then we go to, well, what does society tell us we need to do? And that's the trap. Because
Yes.
society tells us we need everything that we precisely don't need. And that's where we can get really lost. And I think, that is just the toxicity of social media is every single freaking person is telling you you need to do something else. So I'm like, of course you're going to get overwhelmed if you're trying to find the answer on the internet. And ultimately, in my book, How to Get Out of Quasi Recovery, that's coming out hopefully next year, I talk about this a lot, is that the search for a map, the search for here's the pamphlet, A to Z, how to do it, that's actually the very thing that keeps you lost because there is no map for you. And I
Correct.
think that is the hardest part about discovery after an eating disorder is discovering what where will my path lead me because there are no guarantees. You don't have proof of the outcome. Everything is unpredictable, but maybe that's perhaps the very reason to do it. And I think for me, so much of what has come on my path, like I was even telling someone the other day about you and how we connected and how that was also one of those like universal coalescent moments. Like it just had to happen that way. Because I mean, you know how it happened, and obviously not. Well, I don't know if it's worth recapping here, but if I wouldn't have sent out that email at that time after everything I've been through in my life, like we probably wouldn't even be talking right now. And I think
Yeah.
for me, a huge piece of, still about like I hate that word like embracing, but like embracing life and more importantly, trusting life has been about accepting that I really can't control anything. And the more I try to control things, the more those things control me. And that's exactly what an eating disorder does. And that's why that question want is so, so important. It's like rather than asking myself, well, what do I need to do to get X, Y, Z? It's what do I want to do to fulfill, to feel fulfilled, to feel like I'm doing something meaningful. And for me, I structure my days around my writing time because that's the one thing that I know that like as long as I do my writing, I feel like I've done my purpose in some way. Even though that's kind of twisted because my another friend was saying the other day, I hope you know that when you don't write, Livia, you're just as worthy as when you do write. But
True.
for me, it's like an anchor moment that I have in my days, my writing time. And I think that what anchor moment is another very important point and that's what food does and meal times do. They give us those anchor points. And I think that's why they can be so helpful, especially like, as you said, you touched on the interoception piece and reducing anxiety so that you know what you can kind of expect. But they also give us those anchors of like, okay, we have this, we have this, we have this time, we have this time. I can get through today because I know what's coming.
Yes. Just a few different things. And it helps you, I think, when random changes happen that
Mhm.
will disrupt part of that routine. It's like, okay, my routine has been disrupted today, but since most of it is usually kind of free flowing, I can handle it. Like
Yes.
that's really the important part of having like that structureless structure is so when the monkey wrench comes and gums up the works, you pretty much have practiced. You've been there and you've been there whenever you were the one who was changing the routine. Because I struggle with like routine changes still. It's like it's not gonna like go away.
Yeah.
When I was going through stuff recently with like a death in the family and whatnot, like routines were changed all over the place, and it was like it's difficult for me to deal with. But I'm able to adapt to it because I don't allow myself to partake in like that overly rigid behavior. I do go with the elastic band version of structure that I can like stretch out. Like, okay, it's going to be a little bit different today, but there's things I can do. There's some fallbacks I have, and I have some of those parts of the routine that I can slot in that aren't necessarily related to work or responsibility or things like that. That I can like, okay, I can slot in a piece of structure that is like a go-to self-care thing, or maybe I can ask friends if they want to like watch a movie tonight or something, and that will like get me back on track a little bit. It's like little things like that you can sort of slot in and deal with whenever things are thrown off.
Yeah. I think I like that idea of, I know I have that, I'm gonna forever have that metaphor of like the PC slots in my head, but like exchanging the cards. But that's definitely how I see my days too. Because I think part of this is also like demand avoidance in some ways. Like if I say I have to do this, this, and this, and then the time comes, I'm like, I'm decidedly not going to do this, this, and this. It is really important for me to have those options. And then on the day itself, because I usually like plan my day like the night before, because I cannot bear the thought of going to bed without roughly knowing what I'm going to do the next day. So I make a note, obviously, of like, okay, I have this appointment with Mike today. I have this client call today. I have my writing anchor today. Those things are just at a certain time. Like everything around that, like, oh, I need to write a newsletter for the podcast, or oh, I need to film a video or whatever. Those are kind of things like I can do those today. And if I don't get to it, I can move it to the next day. And like having those be like, yeah, you can do it, but you don't have to do them makes me want to do them because I don't have to kind of thing. And I think especially if you're like me, and I don't know, Mike, if you relate to what I'm saying, but you do kind of have that I feel like there's another word for it that's not demand avoidance, but like just that need for autonomy, I guess, and that need to like the freedom, I guess, to make the choice in the moment. I think it can be really helpful to like always have a few options, and then you can pick the one that like feels most aligned with you at that moment. And outside of that, having, like I said before, those anchor moments so that you do know what's coming, that there is like that skeleton that you can like get dressed kind of thing. I like that metaphor.
Of course, I go to a skeleton for a metaphor that's dressed up in a fancy outfit.
Well,
Put a pirate hat on
I
it.
thought of that too because I actually purposely left this out when I was, yeah, just for context, like I'm writing a new book about anorexia and autism, and I'm like starting the book with the history of anorexia and autism. I'm like reading all of these like descriptive articles of like the 1800s and like the old times, when they were just making their first observations about anorexia and stuff. This was a quote from, no, this was from 1680s. This was like one of the first descriptions of anorexia. The guy writes, I do not remember that I did ever in all my practice see one that was conversant with the living, so much wasted with the greatest degree of consumption. Consumption was actually in that time used as like wasting. So like tuberculosis was often seen as like a consumptive disorder. And then it says, like a skeleton, only clad with skin. Yet there was no fever, but on the contrary, a coldness of the whole body. No cough or difficulty with breathing because they thought that if someone was emaciated, like that it was a physical problem. Like why would you willingly be
Yeah.
emaciated? Yet no looseness or any other sign of coliquation or preternatural expense of the nutritious juices. Only her
Nutritious juices.
appetite was diminished, and her digestion uneasy, with fainting fits, which did frequently return upon her. And yeah, and the guy like goes on to try and relieve her of the symptoms with outward application of aromatic bugs, stomach plasters, bitter medicines, and juleps made of weird ingredients. And it's just, kind of super fascinating to me how like this was like 400 years ago they were like just so baffled by the fact that someone wouldn't eat. And like still we obviously do not understand. Well, most medical professionals do not understand because when you look at just like even the current literature of like anorexia at its bare bones, no pun intended, and you read it, it's like you have no idea what you're talking about. And that's why I feel like lived experience is so important because even like in these 400 years. I'm like, we haven't really come very far, honestly, since then.
No,
But
but our language isn't as cool as it was back then. I feel like
oh
a
my
metal
gosh.
riff needed to play over that.
Yeah, like honestly, yeah, same. In the 18th year, fell into a total suppression of her monthly courses from a multitude of cares and passions of her mind. And then this one, but without any symptom of the green sickness following upon it. I was,
Delightful.
yeah, I was reading this and I was like, I cannot wait to like quote every single word of this guy's descriptions.
That's awesome.
Yeah. But oh, okay, so we've been talking about the routines
Yes, Roshi.
and analysis paralysis. How do you get out of the penal? I can't even say this word. How do you
How do
get
you get out of
out?
the analysis paralysis state?
I think there's two parts to this. The first part is how do you ensure you don't get into the analysis paralysis state in the first place?
Yeah.
I'd say what we were talking about before, have structure, have routine, have contained choices. Because if you're gonna give yourself an infinite amount of options, you're basically setting yourself up for analysis paralysis. Because analysis paralysis ultimately is nothing more than just the overwhelm that accompanies not being able to choose. So if you
Yes.
have a structure that you've chosen beforehand, you can't really get into analysis paralysis.
And I think also it's like when we're in that mode, it feels like we have like an infinite amount of choices for what we're ruminating about. When in reality, we don't. It's usually a couple, maybe or something like that, or it's still limited. I mean, 20 is still manageable of a number, but it
Well, it
seems like a
depends on
lot.
what it is. Like, if you're
Sure.
telling me, like, here's 20 different options for a sandwich, like, and they all sound good, I'd be like, can I just eat all of them?
I do need visuals, but no, but I mean, I always have to boil it down whenever I have a lot of that, which I get into it a lot, especially when it comes to food choices, and which has nothing to do with ED or anything else. It just has to
Yeah,
do with like food choices tend to just be something that comes up every day that has multiple components to it.
yeah,
So it just comes up more often than anything else. Well, a lot of times I think we don't boil it back down. Like, okay, there is not actually infinite possibilities. Like looking at this food menu that has several pages.
yeah,
Like there's 10 pages to this menu. Okay, I know this seems like a lot of choices, but I actually don't want most of the things on this menu. Okay, so now suddenly like you can kind of mentally black out the parts. Like, what do I
yes,
actually what are some pieces of this that I want to help me
yes,
narrow this down a little bit more? You look at like, okay, suddenly there's only like 10 choices, which is still a lot, but I can work with narrowing down 10 choices. How do
yes,
I how do I narrow this down? Like, huh, well, let's say like the salad here sound like the chicken salad here sounds really good. It sounds good. I don't really want a salad. Huh. These other things are like a sandwich. I don't really feel like a sandwich. I want something that I can eat with a knife and fork. So and it's like you can start asking yourself questions to narrow it down. I think the analysis paralysis state a lot of times is because we feel like we have to make some sort of decision that has nothing to do with our specific wants or needs, and an inability to properly feel what our wants and needs are. Because for us, it's just difficult to identify our own emotions in regards to choices. And sometimes we do have to sit, and I think a lot of times for me, I have to close my eyes, I have to visualize, I have to like really think about and go like internal and kind of meditate on it for a moment to get out of that mode, but also keep myself when I feel it coming on, just knowing like, okay, this thing there's an event that's about to happen, let's say, and I have to like make a choice. Right now it's I have to start looking at Christmas presents, which always is like there's so many different things to like figure out when buying people Christmas presents. But when I go into it, I know that like, okay, these are the things I need to pay attention to in regards to my choices. And that has to be like my North Star. Like anytime I feel like it's creeping on, I can pull back and go, remember the North Star, Remember like the things you're specifically looking for. So before you start like going off into this direction or anything else, like are the things that you feel like might be overwhelming, do they have anything to do with your North Star? Are there things you need to pay attention to? And honestly, that's just a pretty simple thing when it comes to anxiety and stress in general. There is, pause real quick, because there's a quote that I really like that's very related to this. I can find it in my quotes document because, of course, I have one of those. It's a Plato quote. The human body is the chariot, the self, the man who drives it, thought is the reins, and feelings the horses. I like about that in regards to managing anxiety or managing analysis paralysis is in those moments or when we're entering those moments, like you talked about, how do you keep yourself from getting out of it, getting into it in the first place? Is we lose sight of the fact that we are the ones driving,
Yep.
that there is technically no wrong or right answer for a lot of the things we're in analysis paralysis about. And honestly, whenever there is a clear delineation between what is right and what is wrong, like let's say you were having to go to the DMV or something and there was some sort of choice that came up or,
Hmm.
a legal matter. Honestly, our brains, even for neurodivergence, are aware of that and figure it out. Like it actually takes the onus off of it
Yeah.
because we know what is right and what is wrong in those situations, and then we're able to follow it. It's the stuff that doesn't have any behind it. That's what we get stuck on. And we feel like we need to create some sort of importance to the decision, no matter what it is. And going into these situations, knowing that you are the one driving the chair, every part of you is in charge of what this decision making process is. You drive it, your thoughts are what you grip onto, and your feelings push you forward. To me, that is like one of the best ways to combat that is just remember that you're making the decision and you can make whatever decision you want.
Yeah.
You don't have to include everything and try to figure out what the perfect decision is.
Yeah. That's super powerful, and I think that's kind of the stemming, the root of the analysis paralysis, I think so much of the time is, yeah, but I need to choose the perfect option. And I think there's immense freedom that comes with acknowledging, there is never going to be a perfect option. There's going to be the option that I end up choosing. That's going to be the one, and there's no way of knowing if that's the perfect one because none of them are. And I think a huge part of this is, again, the trust and like giving yourself permission to honor, what your essence, what your being is like nudging you. I use this, I feel like I've talked about this on a podcast, like nudgings. For me, a lot of the time, when I know not something, whether something is right or wrong, but whether I know something is like aligned with me to do it, I really have to take a moment, not turn my brain off because that's never a viable option, but kind of park the thoughts and ask myself, aside from what my head or my logic is telling me, what does my body want right now? And when you can like really become comfortable with creating that space, I think that's when you really can start acting more in alignment with yourself, like increasingly. And I think for me, so much of what I do now, almost all the time, is just aligned with my soul because I've given myself permission to allow that to guide me rather than what my brain is telling me I should or what I've labeled as good or best or perfect or whatever. Because ultimately, that's all those labels are. They're labels. Like, there's no absolute truth because we're subjective humans, which means that no other subjective human can tell us what the absolute truth is either. So I think a lot of that is also, the acknowledgement like that there is no absolute truth at all. You'll never know the absolute truth. Yeah, you can be frustrated about that, but it can also set you free because it means that whatever you do isn't right or wrong. It's just the next step on your path. And you can change that step and go in another direction whenever you want. And wow, we're getting so philosophical now.
And no choice necessarily is permanent, and I
Yes,
forget that sometimes.
me too.
Um, a lot of the choices we make in our day to day lives that often throw us into analysis paralysis are never choices that are like, well, if I make this, the building explodes. Like that's not how any of these decisions work. They're often things we can like take backsies. You
Yeah.
can or go and make another decision, or it's like, oh, that didn't work out, whatever. But we often feel like they're permanent instead of seeing something that they're just fleeting decisions that happen.
Yes. Just like the decision to wrap up this podcast now. Thank you, everyone, so much for listening. We hope to see you inside the academy, where I promise I will be more present because right now I'm just tired. Mike, do you have anything to add before I just hit stop recording?
No, just go ahead and sign up for the Academy if you're interested. We would love to have you there. It's livelabelfree.com/group. Go ahead and go there, read some more information on it, and we hope to see you.